Hi, everyone, and welcome to the pilot episode of The Elitist Nerds. I'm your host, Jonathan Page. For the pilot episode, we're going to be focusing on pretty much the last couple days of here in April and May of 2019 with the big drops of pop culture films and television shows, and focus on the issues with low-quality writing as something gets more and more popular in today's age. To focus on pretty much where I'm going to say just ahead of time that there are spoilers for both Endgame, Game of Thrones, and Star Wars The Last Jedi that might be discussed. The reality is that to follow along with this, you should see those films or television show before coming in here to discuss these things in the comments or just to really absorb what we're discussing. So, it is a hot topic right now to subvert expectations of the viewer. And as time has went on, it has been a thing to completely focus on the idea that they want to trick the viewer. Subversions have been around since the dawn of entertainment, novels, and Shakespeare. But the idea of subverting the normal conventional arcs of story has gotten kind of out of hand and is now utilized as a way to pretty much skip by conventional story arcs, characterization, and to be a way to pretty much fill in plot holes, while most of the time that has created new plot holes. The Last Jedi is considered the worst in the series by popularity because of this. It's 2 years ago when Last Jedi came out, pretty much started a whole area of defending a subversion of the Star Wars format, and people did not agree with it. As time has went on, the reviews, most people have went back on the reviews, and really the content is nothing like the others. The idea of taking a conventional formatted story and not working with the characterization, character development, and the themes of those stories and subverting it for no apparent reason is a real issue. Within the last 48 hours, the most recent episode of Game of Thrones came out in the final season. This would be episode 4. The week before, the almost ultimate battle that everybody's waiting for 8 seasons occurred only in one episode, and all expectations, development in the novels, development in the show, were completely subverted. Everything that was written with intention disappeared. It was a complete spin on how things were going to work, how things ended, how things continued, and all expectations were just derailed for no apparent reason. To take writing and not have any intention, it shows such a lack of forethought and structure to what you're doing. And if you don't know already, the series creators, David Wise and David Benioff, have no more source material because George R.R. Martin is not writing, has not continued any of the books. He's been on delay for over a decade to continue the Game of Thrones series. This shows now that they've ran out of source material, and the same thing that could be said for The Last Jedi. Now that Disney owns Lucasfilms, it shows that there is a total different approach without source material by the original creators that has led to this trend of complete subversion for no apparent reason. And it's now what was only frustrating some of the public after this most recent episode of Game of Thrones. Pop culture is pretty frustrated with everything that's going on. The reason why I mentioned earlier that we'd be discussing Adventures Endgame is that most people are okay with Endgame, that the subversions that were approached and are kind of odd still work, they still fall in the lines with the intentions and themes that Marvel has ran through their 15 plus years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But as far as Game of Thrones goes and Last Jedi, this shows what happens when source material is not existent and new writers are brought on. this lack of intention and strategy in writing is occurring across the board to appeal to the common public, the general public that will now be watching these shows 6 or 7 seasons later or 9 films later, and they're not the target audience. It used to be that for a lot of science fiction and fantasy, it was a trickle-down effect. If you got the approval of the hardcore fan base, it would then trickle down to the general population. But now in the last decade or so, it's starting to change where they're trying to target the general public first and therefore create writing that is for the lowest common denominator of the population. And frankly, it's inexcusable. As this shows, appealing to people that this is just a water cooler discussion over last night's episode of Game of Thrones or the new Star Wars, that they don't really care, that they don't evaluate what's going on in cinema or in television and critique it with a logical, in-depth lens. There has been analysis now done that the idea of that if you are too critical and voice your opinion on pop culture things such as film or television, that you'll actually be ostracized for your strong opinions. And once again, this is the opposite of how it used to be. The voicing your opinion in a positive, critical way is now not very welcomed by the general population. If you look at the front page of Reddit right now, the references to The Last Jedi and the issues with that film are mirroring what is occurring with Game of Thrones. It's concerning. It's concerning that these production companies are not putting writing first and foremost. The hardcore fans of all these different films and intellectual properties are wondering why appeal to the general public now when they will consume that no matter what. It's odd because this is also happening in other forms of entertainment mediums, such as video games. And this is something that we're going to have to deal with more and more if this trend isn't bucked. This subversion of formatted and structured narrative for no apparent reason is a scapegoat. It is a scapegoat for a lack of strategy, for plain and simple. But as time goes on, the reason why The Last Jedi and Game of Thrones is such a monumental disappointment in their hardcore fan bases is because there's no coming back from this. The decisions that they subverted in expectations that make no sense in each of their narratives are putting nails in the coffin in each of these franchises, and it's very, very concerning. And in our next video, we will be going into depth with each of these films or each of these franchises and examining how detrimental these writing decisions are. So at the next video will be for Game of Thrones, and then we will pretty much wrap it up in the third video with The Last Jedi and how this trend has started. So nice to meet y'all. Hope you enjoyed the pilot episode, and stay tuned.